does.
My headsets.
Except it's reversed. Mark's got at least from my point of view, you've got yeah.
There
Oh,
you go.
wait, but can you still hear properly, or do we?
Yeah, no, I can hear properly. I don't need to hear you both in stereo. It's only when it's like playing music that I have to hear you in stereo. So now the red and the blue match the red and the blue on the poster. I'm coordinating. So
well, we appreciate it, and as we were talking about before we got on, we are all coordinated, all wearing black tonight to talk about Darkman, the 1990 Sam Raimi film that I remember. When I was 13, this movie was everywhere on the commercials, and there was a big marketing push for it, and it didn't really do much. I think it made $8 million, and to date, according to Wikipedia, it has made $48 million, which, yikes. But I will say, this movie, watching it now is sort of a time capsule. It is unbelievable. Who's in it? What Sam Raimi was setting the stage for in terms of his own career, just the influence on what comic book movies would come to be, even though this is not a comic book movie officially. Although, from what I was reading, Sam Raimi had wanted to make The Shadow, and he had wanted to make Batman, couldn't get the rights to either. So like, I'll make up my own superhero, and he's Darkman. Yeah. So I mean, I just a shameless plug, not for myself, but Scream Factory recently put out Darkman on a 4K Blu-ray, which has like, and it's got like that wall of text of extras on the back and all that good stuff. So I'll be talking about that in a future featured extras segment. Yeah, so what I love about this movie, even though I don't love the movie, and I'll explain why, and it's not because I hate it or anything like that, it's just because this was never really my bag. But watching it now as an adult, I'm warming to it. But what I love about it is you can tell that everybody who's involved in it really cared about making something unique and different, and that had a distinct voice. And I think that's part of my issue with it is I had to keep reminding myself, oh, this is Sam Raimi. This is the Evil Dead guy. He would go on to do Spider-Man, sort of tame some of these instincts that are coming out in this movie. But there were several moments, including the very opening scene, where I'm like, all right, tone down the Warner Brothers cartoon stuff and just give me this, the straightforward kind of crime scene, because it's a bit wacky. However, before we get into all of that, who are we talking to tonight? Well, of course, you're talking to me. I'm Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We have Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Mark, the Movie Man Krawcheck, the film that Sam Raimi, even though he didn't know it at the time, he made this movie for Mark.
He did. He did make it for me. I swear he did. So,
so welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here, folks. I'm glad you're joining in. If you're catching this live or in the replay, thanks for hanging out. And if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will talk about it all. But Mark, since you are a Mark for Darkman, we should call this movie Markman.
Markman. Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh, there you go.
Don't do that to your show. Don't do that to your show.
Tell us. I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Mr. Spoiler Room.
We'll try it. We'll try it.
Well, because Jeff had mentioned before the show started that I think you were a little bit afraid to give the synopsis.
Got a lot of exposition to get through.
I'm a little
maybe
nervous.
Mark will boil it down, because
I'm a little nervous
wondering if
myself.
I could boil this down, but he will. I know.
Let's see. It's Phantom of the Opera meets Batman. There you go.
Batman of the Opera. I love it.
And scene.
And scene.
How do we feel about that? What did the class think? I thought he could have gotten a little deeper into the character.
At least you didn't say it's really, 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 really like Phantom of the Opera, and it's kind of like Batman.
It's like you mashed them together. You add that pepper of Sam Raimi without MCU producers looking over his shoulder, and what you got is a tried and true early Sam Raimi superhero film. You're right. He couldn't get the rights to Batman. He couldn't get the rights to the Shadow. He makes his own, which mixes some of those elements in. We get a very young, before he had he's got a different set of special skills in here. Mr. Liam Neeson, who has played a scientist who is working on prosthetics. Before, it's amazing how many things in this film have actually happened, like 3D printing, but he's looking at prosthetic that actually uses living cells to replace body parts that, make prosthetic body parts out of real living cells, but he can never get them past 99 minutes. That's his problem. But he's got this wonderful girlfriend in Frances McDormand, who plays a lawyer, who happens to uncover some shady dealings of her boss that involve real estate. Well, yeah, she wasn't supposed to get her hands on this document. She's got it. And shady guys, we don't know it yet. I'm not going to give spoilers, but let's just say she knows that she's a deep, dark secret. Suddenly guys show up looking for her and the document. They find the document and scientist guy, blow up scientist guy. And everybody thinks he's dead because they found a piece of his ear. Turns out he's not dead. He shows up as John Doe, all burnt to a crisp. Nobody can ID him. And ends up in an experimental facility where they cut off the feelings to someone's body if they get burned too much. But by doing so, amplifies his adrenaline, his rage, and, he breaks free. And events ensue. He finds himself a lair, and he's out for revenge while also wanting to reconnect with his girlfriend and just so happened to MacGyver the shit out of an old foundry to create his lab again so he could create masks in which he poses as various villains in order to get the money from them to help fund his research so he could get past the 99-minute mark and rejoin the love of his life. Think Clayface kind of, but Clayface can only hold his form for 99 minutes.
Yeah, you brought up the Batman thing, and it occurs to me, like, we talked, I think it was last week when we were talking about Dune 2, and you brought up John Carter of Mars, and one of the reasons people, I think you had brought this up, Mark, that people complained that, this movie is ripping off so many other movies, and you pointed out, well, yeah, but it's also an old story that these movies were inspired by, and then so they're kind of like ripping themselves off or something. I kind of got that weird feeling here because there's so much in Darkman that feels like I've seen this before, but then you realize, I saw this in 1992 with Batman Returns, and with Michelle Pfeiffer discovering the secrets of Max Schreck's shady real estate dealings, and you look Spider-Man, the big, any one of those movies really, the big climactic fight on the construction site. You've got Face Off from 1997, which also dealt with 3D printing body parts and an explosion in a lab when they're trying to get rid of the scientists who'd created the technology. Although in this case, it was more like inadvertent. They were trying to get to, the girlfriend. Yeah. But there's so much in here that, if you've never seen this before, you're discovering the movie for the first time on home video, or someone recommended it to you and you're watching like, this is like everything else. You do kind of have to reset your frame to say, yeah, but it kind of came first in a lot of ways. Even though Sam Raimi was inspired by pulp material, a lot of this stuff was, from his imagination. And it's one of my theories about movies that are big and they come out and they fail. It almost feels like they gives license to other filmmakers to say, well, if I rip this off from this movie, no one's going to notice because no one saw that damn movie, right? I'm going to make it better. Yeah. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. Jeff, how did you come to Darkman? You seemed eager to be on the show almost as much as Mark did. Did this have a special place in your heart, or do you hate it and you can't wait to rip it apart?
No, I actually liked it a lot. And I also am, one of the things I'm proud about being on both of your shows, in addition to just being on both of your shows, is as oftentimes the elder critic in the room, I can say that I saw these when I was an adult. So I had kind of a sense of it that, you couldn't blame on youth, or if I liked it, it was because I liked it, not that, I was a crazy 12-year-old, like I'm sure Mark was.
I was 13.
Oh, 13.
I was 15. I was 15.
Okay. But the one thing too that helps me tell you and put it in that same context is, in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a certain amount of, dare I say, gonzo filmmaking that was becoming very popular in a lot of adventure movies and things like this, where they're just trying to be fantastical and bigger and kind of ballsier and dare I say a little bit comical too. There was pushing the dark comedy in these kind of things and having some wit and even puns and visual sort of gags, even slapstick and stuff like that. I mean, it's hard to believe that serious actors Liam Neeson and Frances McDormand, who have these vaulted reputations, are in what is essentially claptrap, but it's really well done and fun claptrap. I mean, almost pulp, but that was kind of the style back then. And now it looks aged and dated, and all the video kind of bad special effects green screen things that Raimi did, even when he started the first Spider-Man, unfortunately, because he didn't have the budget for it, looks cheesy as shit now. But back then it was kind of funny because it was trying to look like a comic book, and it was trying to look a little flattened, and the colors were very vivid, almost like you would color in a color panel, and I think movies like Creepshow and some of those things, even though that was almost a decade earlier, had a little bit of that same flair where they were making fun of this but having fun with it too. So that humor may not have lasted the test of time and stood the test of time as well, but at the time it was very funny. I think this one failed because it didn't have stars. It was a sort of derivative concept, if you will. There were other things going on around this, including the original Batman. I think some people perceived it as too much of sort of a bad straight-to-video riff almost, albeit done by a somewhat named director. But Raimi wasn't the name that he is now or has been because of the Spider-Man movies. Evil Dead was a cult classic at best. It was not like top-drawer horror by any means, and Bruce Campbell was never an A-lister. And this, I think, was sort of derided because of some of those things going into it. However, for those who liked it then and those who like it now, and I think it builds that sort of reputation as a cult film, there's a lot to love here. There's a lot to enjoy. Is it great filmmaking? No. Is it fun filmmaking? Hell yeah.
Here's the thing. I think there are moments of greatness in this. I mean,
sure.
I watched this at home on my, 43-inch TV. Yes, I haven't gotten out of the year 2015.
I've got a 43-inch TV, so we're twinsies. So there you go.
Okay, good. And I think the reason is because we're not allowed to get bigger TVs.
Thank you. Yes, well, same thing. We're twinsies there too.
Is that the spouse we're talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
You'll not get a TV at the wall, honey. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, well, that TV's big enough for the room. You get something bigger, it's going to overtake the room. Yeah, but it'll be a bigger TV. Ours works just fine.
I'm going to give you some fatherly advice to the audience, and it's a trap you can avoid. If your wife or husband or whoever says, "Yeah, you can get a really cool shelving unit / bookcase, display case, whatever, for all your Blu-rays and DVDs. You can take up the entire living room. That's great. Get the ones from IKEA, honey, where it's like you can frame the TV in the middle of it. It'll look awesome." Don't do that, because once you install those bookshelves, you can't get a size TV that's bigger than the middle space. So that's where I'm at.
This PSA brought to you by us domesticated ones.
Now you know.
That's right.
The more
yes.
you know.
And knowing is half the
knowing is half the battle.
Anyway, yes. Okay. I'm going to pull over for a second because I want to talk about that great filmmaking thing and why I brought up my television. Remind me, helicopter. Okay, so first, I want to pull over some comments. Yep. Miguel, good old buddy from art school.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget the movie Body Parts with Jeff Fahey. Hey, Miguel, I don't know if you know this or if we've talked about it, but Jeff is also a former Academy alumni, American Academy of Art, you and I, and Jeff. Yes, and Miguel. Well, yeah, we graduated together. Well, the associates portion anyway. Let's see. We've got David Wilt. I think this movie was Sam Raimi's own version of Batman, because Batman came out a year early and it was such a hit movie. Yes, I could see that. I mean, like, this movie was probably in development a long time before Batman. I think this was one of those kind of coincidental things. And Raimi had tried to get his own Batman off there. I'll guarantee you he got like the notice from his agent or the Warner Brothers lawyers saying, it's not going to happen. So it's like, okay, I'll make Darkman.
Man,
screw Warner Brothers.
I wish I would have seen his shadow though. I bet his shadow would have been awesome.
I mean, it's just, it just looks like any other shadow, right? Just against the wall, kind of hanging out. Anyway, all right. David Wilt, one of my favorite parts in the movie is when Darkman disguises himself as Durant, played by the late Larry Drake, and he frames him for armed robbery at a liquor store. That was fun. The kind of CCTV caption of it. Yeah, that was.
And there was also that great shot where they're in the revolving door, and then they stop right outside, and they're looking at each other like, "Are you me? Am I you?" It was very clever.
Well, yeah, because it was 1990, and Back to the Future 2 and 3 were doing that. So everybody was using that technology once they discovered how to use it.
That's right.
Both actors in the same scene. Yeah.
And that was a great trailer shot. I mean, most of what I remember about the trailer from this movie was Larry Drake as Durant, because he had the revolving door scene, and they had that great line where he's like, he's a cockroach. You think you kill him, and he pops up someplace else.
Well, that goes.
Yeah, it was great.
That goes with what Jeff was saying. Out of all the names in this film, I mean, now the names in this film we all recognize, but at the time it came out, Larry Drake was the probably biggest name at the time this film came out.
Certainly the most popular by nature of being on a top 10 television show,
right.
and an Emmy winner to boot for LA Law. I mean, Francis McDormand had done the Coen Brothers, Blood Simple, and a couple of smaller films. But that's the thing and Liam Neeson had been sort of the go-to lanky fifth or sixth lead in a lot of movies.
Right.
He was in The Mission. He was in what was the one with Cher where she played the defense attorney?
Not Moonstruck.
No, something like Suspect. Anyway,
maybe I think it was Suspect. Yeah. Hey, let's not forget.
I'm sorry.
Next of Kin with Patrick Swayze.
Exactly. He was. I was just going to say Next of Kin.
No one remembers they're in those films.
He was building up a certain reputation, and he had been a stage actor mostly in London and done a couple of things on Broadway. I think he had done Anna Christie as well as some other things. But this was kind of his big first lead role, and he's good in it, and he's not so good in some things. Overacts a little bit, but then the whole thing is arch. And like I was saying, those kind of art shows, just like Body Parts, were done. Where they're just pushing it a little bit, but it's fun to watch. It's very, very much that sort of late '80s, early '90s kind of vibe. Total Recall. I think Total Recall is maybe the poster child, poster of that kind of exact mentality. Like, we're pushing this. It's a little bit, almost comical in its, but it's funny and compelling as hell.
And also 1990. Yeah, it was a huge year for movies.
Yeah, there you go.
I've got my 3-disc vinyl collection of the 30th anniversary of Total Recall soundtrack. It's awesome.
3, wow.
Yeah, it's got the original soundtrack that was released in 1990, which I also have on CD and tape, and then it's got the 2 other discs, which are all the music cues from the movie.
By the way, Ian, who is the composer? Don't say, Mark.
I'm not good with composers.
Okay. It's Mark's and my
Jerry Goldsmith.
Composer. Yes, Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith did Total Recall. In fact, his name got applause at the Music Box 2 years ago when they showed it with Michael Ironside talking about the movie afterwards.
Nice.
Don't give me too much credit, Jeff. He's the one composer that I can pull off the top of my head aside from Hans Zimmer. But that's
John
only
Williams,
because of True Romance. Oh yeah, but he's more of an institution, not so much a composer.
Sure enough.
All right, so Miguel also says the thing about Darkman that I like was some of the cinematography. The scene when they blow up the lab, yes. How the up-close shot of the iris reacting to the explosion, but then had moments of that contrast, like the fair when he breaks the guy's fingers from poking his chest. Great moments and equally bad. Look, you're calling that scene equally bad. Jeff, you mentioned Creepshow earlier. That bit where Liam Neeson is freaking out at the carnival, he looks up and he sees like the red crack forming in the advertisement with like the people's faces, and then he bends the fingers and his face. Even they do the close up that reminded me of the Leslie Nielsen kind of freak out close up in that one segment. It totally doesn't work, except it does. I can't quite explain it, except to say that here's I finally figured out why I've got a problem with this movie. It's that the opening scene is so cartoonish with the bad guys and the one dude with like the David Byrne coat and all these bad guys are rolling up on him to like have a gang war. They have the dude with the prosthetic leg that's also like this weird machine gun, and it's so Dick Tracy. It's so Dick Tracy over the top. But here's the thing: the movie overall would have been much stronger if we had been grounded in this reality. And it gets crazier as Peyton Westlake loses his mind. Like the movie would start to lose its own grip on reality and become this like crazy farcical thing. But we're like chomping carrots and drawing fake, walls for the Roadrunner or the Roadrunners for the Coyote from frame 1. And it's just like, I need some balance. But who am I to argue with Raimi?
To answer that, though, Ian, I think this is fascinating, and maybe one of the reasons that I think Batman was so influential and maybe has endured better than some of these, that Tim Burton approached a comic book source material as a serious film.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these that were a la comic books or derived from comic books or wanting to have that flavor went for a lot of the comic book quotations, if you will. For example, in Creepshow, which works so well, in addition to like the weird design behind Leslie Nielsen when he's screaming to echo his mouth going, ah, and then it's like this kind of drippy behind him, or the changes in color, or even the framing. Like, remember when Vivica Lanford is first going to the home for Father's Day and the car comes this way in the one frame, and then in Ian's frame, it's going the other way. It's genius, but they're all in frames. And same here. He's making this very comic book. My favorite comic book transition that he does is where Frances McDormand holds up what's remaining of her dead boyfriend, and then it transfers her to the same position at the funeral. Exactly what they would do in a comic book, like that thing, and then you turn the page and she's in the same position, but the background has changed. So some of these were very conscious or conscientious, whatever you want to call it, about trying to ape that and sort of have fun with it. Oh, see, it's like a comic book. I made my own comic book, and I'm giving it that kind of look and feel throughout. It looks a little dated, it looks a little corny in retrospect, but I think that's also one of the reasons that Batman was so interesting, that he shot it almost like it was this sort of gothic horror tale in a way, without having any of that wink, wink. This isn't really serious. I mean, he shot it almost like Gordon Willis would have shot it, with a lot of shadows and darkness and underlying sort of the sinister rather than the comedic. I mean, there's a couple of shots like when the bat airplane gets right in front of the moon and becomes the bat signal. But there aren't too many visual puns like that in Burton's material, where here there's all kinds of visual puns and plays on the tropes of comic books.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that transition scene with McDormand going from the lab to the funeral, because it reminds me of, I could very easily see like a scene out of a Spider-Man comic drawn by like one of the Ramitas, of like showing that transition, but they do this all in a single frame with animation. Now this is 1990. This is 34 years ago, probably 35 when they're making it. So you realize, I mean, there's some computer graphics in the film when they show some of the the digital effects, the primitive digital effects of the body parts being rendered in the lab. But I imagine a lot of what they did with McDormand in that transformation was probably like stop motion's probably a bad way to think of it, but it wasn't digital like you'd see today. They do that all in the computer and all that stuff. So you watch it now and you're fascinated. Like, if you are taken out of the movie in that sense of like, oh, I love films, I love filmmaking. Wait, how did they do that? I don't quite understand. It's almost like you're watching a miracle in front of you. Plus, it's a very poignant scene because she's so great. I mean, it's not. One of the things is, like, you see these people they go on to become Academy Award winning performers, but to see them start out in this and to take the material so seriously, you can see what an elevated performance can do to, frankly, schlock. I'm glad that you brought up Tim Burton, because yes, he did take it seriously. By contrast, I bring this up all the time, so forgive me, but on the commentary for, I think it was Batman and Robin, or maybe it was Batman Forever, Joel Schumacher is talking about how he would direct scenes, and it was always like, bigger, remember, this is a comic book. I'm like, oh, now it all makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those times where we've gotten so many comic book films, which we didn't foresee 35 years ago. And we've talked about it before with other things, to where this is still a fledgling genre. I mean, Batman came out and everybody's like, holy crap. But like you said, Darkman was, conceived adjacent or in parallel to Batman. It just wasn't given the budget Batman has. Burton took advantage of the budget they gave him and squeezed every dime and out of their budget, to build the sets and that. Whereas here, Raimi has to work with a less budget. So instead of everything on sets and controlled, he's got to do location shots, which make things a lot tougher. but he still does, I think, the most with his script that with the budget he's given. And given the time this came out, that's part of the reason why I loved it. I'm like, holy crap, we're going to be getting more of these. And then we did, but it wasn't what I wanted out of the sequels. But in any case, but as far as this one goes, yeah.
And they did go straight to video, most of those, I think.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about it too is I think, people like Raimi with this one were doing a pretty wonderful bridge in some respects to, I would argue, Schumacher's disrespect for the idea of comic books and what comic books came really at the turn of the century. I mean, if you look at the stuff that was done before Darkman or even before Burton, it was a lot of crappy stuff on television. They did a Fantastic Four movie. They did Spider-Man with
Thor
Nicholas, what's it, Nicholas, the guy who was the oldest son in Sound of Music. And, it was a little silly. I mean, the closest you got to sort of a serious take on it was, I think they did some very sensitive work with Bill Bixby and the Incredible Hulk, even though that had certain limitations to it being a TV weekly. But still, there was this.
Just to cut in for a second, Jeff, there was, I think it was in '89, they did an Incredible Hulk movie.
Eesh.
I don't know if it was the trial of the Incredible Hulk, but Matt Murdock's Daredevil showed up in it, and he was in the black costume, and that was, I remember just flipping out because I was reading Daredevil at the time, like, this is great. But
yeah, and there were the comic books were starting, I think, in well, and you could argue going back to Stan Lee and those people back in the 40s, 50s and 60s, but comic books were, I think, still being perceived by a lot of people as inferior or childlike or silly material, as clearly Joel Schumacher, who did not do his homework properly. But that this kind of stuff was starting to step away. Now, the one thing though that I give Raimi credit for, and some of the people who were doing it well, is they knew enough to have fun with this. But I also love how frugal Raimi is in this too. Like, he's like, okay, I've got this really good stage actor. I don't know how much he can do. I don't know how much he can run and jump. And we know from Taken that he can't do a lot of it. Grant you, that was many years later. I'm going to cover up the guy so I can have a stuntman do all this shit. Nobody will know it's not him. Yeah. And she was like, wow. I mean, I know that's the same idea of kind of the cowl and everything, but at some point you kind of go like, well, that isn't George Clooney's jaw. So you have to have George Clooney in the suit. Here it's like, no, just give me a tall actor who's lanky. Well, he's not that lanky. He's a little heavier than Liam. That's all right. He's got a big coat on. Just flash that coat around like it's a cape. I mean, that is, he's being very frugal about what he can do with his money here, But just to wrap up that last point is, then you hit like 2000, and I think you get to start to get like the Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis, where he's really taking it differently, and you don't have really any of those moments in the Spider-Man comics the way he was writing them. To your point, where it's remember the famous half face like Peter Parker and Spider-Man, then the Peter Parker face is going. Like that, agony of being split in two, and just took it more serious. But this was sort of that nice transition. He and Burton were starting to lay the groundwork that Schumacher forgot, but other people remembered. And we can have fun with it, but you can't be laughing at it. You have to be laughing with it.
Well, you guys are more of the comic book experts than I am, but I do remember that's when I started getting into comics and collecting them. And around 89 and 90, this is why I love Batman 89. This is why this is that milestone movie for me, because it's not only a milestone movie for cinema showing, hey, you can make something other than Superman marketable and be a comic book film and be a serious film and be taken, but comics also were changing from what I remember in my childhood at the time. That's where the concept of the graphic novel started coming into be with Darkman and Batman and, Ninja Turtles. And suddenly your comics went from kind of the brightly colored villain of the week type of thing to this a little more mature stories, a little bit darker. Your characters had a little more layers. They were doing other things. They were kind of taking a page out of Heavy Metal, the magazine, Heavy Metal, and doing nothing that mature. But I mean, that's where Dark Horse started. I remember Dark Horse, and I used to consume so much Dark Horse film comics because I thought they were just amazing compared to what I had seen in the 80s. So you've got that transition too of comics becoming more mature. Not they didn't lose their fun, but they handled more mature material, or they were darker, or they were painted more artistically. That was
right. I mean, I think that the timeline works out perfectly well because you've got 1986 was, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Right around that time, you've got Batman: The Killing Joke. It's within that same window that you've got Batman: A Death in the Family, where famously they had a phone number that you could call in to vote. Does the Joker kill Robin or does Robin live? And America decided, hey, let's kill off the boy wonder.
Robin.
Right. And thank goodness, because that's one of the greatest, talk about the 9 panel of just Joker going to work with him on a crowbar. But anyhow, you had this comics were making national news, because this is when you were starting to see comics aren't just for kids anymore kind of headlines. And then the movies began catching up with them, and people were like, oh, that's at the point where Tim Burton could make Beetlejuice, and then he could say, look, I've got Michael Keaton. This is kind of like a dark, twisted, weird movie. It's very popular. I can write my own ticket, but look what's going on in the comics culture. I can do this with Batman. And then he made Edward Scissorhands like the year later. I mean, was there any greater 3-movie blockbuster streak than Burton from 88 to 90?
For a couple of years.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right. So, but I'm saying the comics fed the movie culture, and the movie culture, even though it took a little while, some starts and fits, because you still had people who kind of didn't get it making these things. Eventually, that blossomed into what we have today, or I should say, 5 years ago. Better or worse.
Because they resisted some of the violence and the darkness of these things, which, The Dark Knight Returns is vicious. It's vicious comic book. But at the same time, Frank Miller also imbued it with a lot of character. And, I think that's what, certainly where Stan Lee and the people at Marvel started to make their name a little bit more, is they were getting into these people who had problems functioning as regular Joes and Janes outside of the cowl and stuff. But I mean, here, I think you're seeing, even here, there's a pathos to it. There's a sensitivity. There's, we're as interested in Westlake as we are when he is in the sort of Darkman guise. And I think that was a little bit of the shift too, that not only happened with a lot of the examples you said, but by the time, and I don't mean to harp on Brian Michael Bendis, but by the time he was doing his thing, and then he went on to Powers and some of those kind of things, the characters were more interesting when they weren't the superheroes. I mean, he made Peter Parker's teenage years as good as James at 15 was when I was a kid, and that only lasted one season, or My So-Called Life. It was those kind of things. So a lot of characterization came through, if not quite the same violence, a lot of the same characterization that started to fill these things, like the examples you said infilled here. And I think this movie is an example of it. I think it's more interesting when Liam Neeson is actually in Liam Neeson face with the fake 99 minutes that he's got to go for, than when he's running around clearly as a stuntman.
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, there's layers to this character. For as campy and schlocky as people remember it, I just watched it before the show again, just because. I've got
Mark, man.
But I wanted to watch it anyway, just because it's been a while since I watched it, and watching it again, it's surprising how, where you do have your camp, your schlock, your Raimi-isms, there's those moments where you get pause. It takes a breath, where you feel for Darkman that this isn't just a superhero guy looking for revenge. He is frustrated. He can't get the mask to get to his girl, to spend time with his girl. He doesn't want her to see him the way she is, he is. And you get those somewhat quiet moments. And even through the makeup, Liam Neeson manages to convey some emotion for this guy, to where you
those
feel
eyes,
sympathy for Darkman.
Right. I would also say too, that while you've got, the Robert Duran character, who I think that was it the third movie that he was the Darkman, the Revenge of Durant or something.
I didn't watch past the first one.
He becomes Darkman for a while.
But nonetheless, I mean, you've got him as this really wonderful sort of secondary villain, like almost like a Bond villain, who's like an odd job or somebody like that, who's kind of the main henchman. But to your point about sort of the maturity of this, the main villain, Louis Strack, played by Colin Friels, is not some mustachio twirling, vicious bad guy, because he's got to be liked enough to keep Frances McDormand's attention for part of it. And he's kind of a slick talking, handsome, I would dare say even charming businessman, even though he's corrupt. But there's that scene where he talks about, and there will be dancing, and he swirls her around. And it's like, I love the fact that they gave the villain, somebody who you kind of enjoy, or he's not at least hissable the way Billy Zane was in Titanic. I mean, what was Billy Zane other than really beautiful? Not much likability there, but this guy's he's got some props or some attributes that would attract Frances McDormand's Julia Hastings.
And let's not forget the centrifuge. Excuse me, I know it's a big word. It hurt. That's my big word for the month. Let's
Thank you, Mr. Science.
Yeah. Let's not forget the centrifuge that Raimi does in general for your comic book film, because when we are first seeing Durant, you think he's the heavy. You think he's the main boss, the way he presents himself, the way he is. And we come to find out, no, he's Mr. Scarface. He's a middle guy compared to a big guy almost, he's the dirty work second in command, but you don't get that.
He's the easy villain.
Right, because he opens
the Illuminati top tier villain.
Right. Well, but that's the thing is I don't think that's quite true either, because the way that he is described by our main bad guy is he's a business partner in this venture. It's almost like like he's the business partner that is willing to kill people and get his hands dirty, and the other guy's like kind of the money and the he's the architect and the visionary. He's like, I don't know about snapping necks, I'm gonna have this guy do it because he loves it. There's that great line where he said, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is I can't remember what it was, and it's like, what's the good news? And the good news, he said, the good news is your wife's dead. And it's delivered with such a weird cadence to it, and the reaction is so strange that I couldn't tell if Durant even, maybe he did have a wife, maybe he didn't, and that's why I didn't understand the joke. But I'm like, I could see this guy being married. Strangely, he comes home, he's obsessed with cigars, but his wife never looks in the cigar case to see it's actually the fingers he's clipped off, because that's his gimmick, is you like snipping off fingers with a cigar clipper. Yeah, we got a ton of comments. So I'm going to pull over here again to talk about some of them. So going back a bit, did not know that about Jeff. Cool, that's the art school connection. I remember that. David Wilt again said Body Parts came out same year as Child's Play 3, and both movies star Brad Dourif. Yes.
Right. I've got Body Parts on Laserdisc.
Well, you should clean them off. It's going to mess up the video experience. All right. I noticed how they make a reference to Raiders of the Lost Ark in the scene where Darkman tortures one of the bad guys, played by Sam Raimi's brother Ted, and he says, "I will tell you everything." And Darkman replies, "I know you will." Very good.
Hey, I can also make a connection to Mark's show 2 nights ago. That guy was based on Peter Lorre.
Yeah.
I know you will.
I know you will.
I mean, they literally cast him to look like Peter Lorre. And
oh yeah. They obviously, absolutely was.
We talked about him the other night on Mark's show. Just for those of you,
I was there
traveling with. Yeah. Well, I'm explaining it to David et al. Not just I know you were there, sir.
There was once a Darkman TV movie.
Yeah, there was.
It was originally supposed to be a pilot for a TV series. Was it any good? No.
There's a reason why it did become a TV series.
Is it one of those things? Can you find the pilot like on YouTube or something? Or
I forgot where it is. My friend has it, but I think it's.
I'm gonna have to. I'm curious.
David E. Kelly's Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Oh, before I go on, because I don't want to forget this. We're talking about charismatic villains. It reminded me. This guy almost reminded me of the Dick Jones character from RoboCop.
Yeah,
if he was in the body, or at least the age range of Miguel Ferrer from RoboCop.
By the way, that's another of those movies, the action adventure movies that was pushing to almost be kind of gonzo in its way.
And both involving development deals in Michigan, Detroit. Yeah,
exactly.
I love that you look at this movie, it opens up like, oh, this is New York or something. They all have Michigan license plates. I'm like, yeah, you keep it real, Sam Raimi. All right, so David Wilt said there was once a Darkman. Oh, we read that. Okay, sorry. Been a long day.
YPA.
Mike, Mr. Crowley, YPA Review says, "Hey gang, wish I could be there. I do too. Where are you? I assume working or I don't know, watching Darkman." Okay, David Wilt says the same year this movie came out, we had the movie Dick Tracy, and both movies had the score by Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman,
Batman.
another composer I know that I never think of when people say, "Who's your favorite composer?" I don't know. Yes. Yeah, Dick Tracy, Batman, and Darkman. Man, this guy was busy.
Elfman
he was on a tear.
He was on a tear. He started from Big Top Pee Wee, and he had that stretch of years to where it just was like he was cranking.
And he just won an Emmy 2 months ago for the theme for the Wednesday TV series.
Oh, that's right. He did, didn't he? Yeah.
Best theme song from a TV show last year, Wednesday.
Is there an alternate universe where Michael Keaton swapped places with the composer, and it was Elfman in 1989, but then the Oingo Boingo was led by Michael Keaton, and they had a hit song called Batman's Party.
Oh,
anyway, did anyone else notice how Danny Elfman's music sounds like a knockoff of his own Batman score?
He suffered from. Don't get me wrong, I love Danny. Danny is probably my favorite composer. Well, one of my favorite composers. I have many, actually. I can't just pick one. But for Danny's music during this time, it was all similar instrumentation. Steve Bartek was his orchestrator, and you even had Shirley Walker conducting. And for some of it, she did. I think she did Edward Scissorhands with it. But you had the same or similar orchestrations because he was working with Steve Bartek. And so a lot of these sound similar. Like you could use some of these cues because if you listen to the Nightbreed soundtrack, it sounds very similar to Darkman and to Batman in many ways with the instrumentation. There's a different kinetic energy to it. And oh my God, am I just throwing my soundtrack geekdom all over your podcast? I'm sorry.
No, this is great because this is an area that I need to be more educated.
Well, believe you me, too, the studio probably loved that fact. Too. It's like, so you even got Danny Elfman. It's going to sound just like Batman. In fact, Batman it's half our name.
I mean, all these composers go through streaks to where they have similar orchestrations because they're in a specific creative mind or whatnot. So
I also don't want to get in trouble here, Mark, but you may know this. I think the story, if I'm not mistaken, is that Danny Elfman doesn't actually write the music down. He sings
here
it.
we go. Yeah.
Is that true? He does it by ear. And so his orchestrator is very key on divvying up the parts and what's the bass line played by and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons I think Danny Elfman hasn't been given his due as much, certainly by the Academy. I think he's only gotten one Academy Award nomination. But I think that's one of the things they hold against him is that he's like Mel Brooks when he wrote The Producers. He sings it or plays it in a tape recorder, and the orchestrator figures out who plays what parts.
I've heard that story, but I'm not sure because I haven't found anything outside of people's hearsay. Of course, Danny won't say either way. I don't really care. I love the music anyway.
Yeah. I mean, he comes up with great themes and a lot of great stuff. So
and especially this time, but this time period, I get what Mike is saying. The soundtracks for this time period are very similar. If you listen to Music for a Darkened Theater, Volume 1, they've got a lot of these tracks from these movies on it because it was a compilation of his stuff. It was like a best hits of his. And some of these tracks all could have been applied to any one of the movies that they were in, and they would have still fit. But I've listened to the Darkman soundtrack so many times. So.
And Ian, just to tell you, because you say you don't know as much about soundtracks, a lot of times too, the people who compose the soundtracks don't even, they don't conduct the orchestra.
Yeah.
A lot of times they'll get somebody else to do that. Gary Goldsmith did, I'd say, probably about half and half, if I'm not mistaken, with his school. Like sometimes it was depending on what orchestra he's at, who's got the shorthand with that orchestra, because you only got probably maybe 2-3 days to record it anyhow. So it has to be done fairly quick.
That sounds like it involves a lot of trust or a lack of caring at all. Well, like, just take this.
Well, he's there. He's get somebody else to conduct it.
I think Steve Bartek was part of Oingo Boingo, but that's why he's worked with Danny forever. And Shirley Walker, that's part of the reason why she was able to do the music for Batman the Animated Series, because she worked with Danny, and that's why Edward Scissorhands is probably one of his best scores ever, is because he had his orchestrator and he had Shirley Walker conducting, and you had him composing. It was beautiful. But sorry, okay.
But and just one last thing to share the praise of those three together. There's a sound to those scores by Danny Elfman that I think are oftentimes as identifiable as some of the types of things that you can identify Goldsmith by, or John Williams, or Elmer Bernstein, or Bernard Herrmann. Even some of those are like that kind of stuff that he uses, always the children's choir or the sort of awe sounding lyrics has become a staple of his stuff, and it's identifiable and it's fun. So whatever works. He's had a 40-year career now doing this, so he's great.
Oh yeah. Miguel says, I want to say that Steven Spielberg said there's no such thing as an original story anymore. Wasn't Kane, creator of Batman, inspired by Zorro? Wouldn't be surprised.
Do you know who originally said there are no new ideas? I believe it was Voltaire back in the late 1600s. So I think we're doing okay 4 or 5 centuries later.
I put my money on God on like day 8.
Hey, I did that already, guys. Hey, sorry, Adam. You're just naming the shit, but you know what? I put the thought in your head.
There we go. Speaking of James Horner.
Liam Neeson was also in Krull. Yes.
There you go.
There you go.
He was what was the Cyclops' name? Because that was him, right? He was the big Cyclops dude in Krull.
I forgot the Krull. I forgot the Cyclops. I got the movie right over here. I forgot the name of it though. It's been a while since I watched Krull, but
I'm disappointed, Mark.
I know. I know.
Blade 1998 was the first Marvel movie rated R. Is Dead? Well,
I think
I was going to say Deadpool, Wolverine
rated R that are in the Marvel family. Are there?
I think the Deadpool movies,
they were.
Yeah, Deadpool was the second one. So we didn't get many rated R superhero films that were actually in the theaters. Darkman was one of them. I remember seeing this in the theater. And it was, you know, it says it's rated R, but if you look at it by today's standards, I'm surprised it would probably get a PG-13 rating, except for the dialogue, you know, because even that, I mean, you look at it now, it's like, you know, it's more rated R for the situations versus actual what is shown, because nowadays they show a little bit less, but not that much more on TV.
Right. I mean, I think the R-ratedness is kind of peppered throughout. You've got the F-bombs, but you're talking about situation like the opening scene. You've got, you know, Larry Drake snipping the guy's fingers off, even though you don't see a whole lot. But just the look of Darkman, particularly at the end when his bandages are falling off and you see his face is like bloody and like it just looks like meat. It's like something Clive Barker would have designed. I don't know.
It feels a little more, dare I say, grounded too. Like the violence seems more like Godfather violence than cartoon violence.
A little bit.
Well, because it's gangsters and it's recognizable. I mean, you can imagine getting your finger snipped off with a cigar cutter. It's just and it's awful. It's as opposed to stuff that a little more fantastical that takes you away from it because it's not real.
That shows you. I don't care what anybody says. I think where Raimi is a very creative filmmaker, it shows you where he's creative with this, because you never actually see the finger get cut. You see it put on there. They spin it around, and he cuts just before, but you get the sound of the cut, and just the hook sound of the cut, and then they show back, and then the figure. You're like. And you're like, ooh, but he never actually shows the finger being cut.
Yeah,
that would have cost.
And then we do get the cigar box later on.
Well, you do,
fingers, but it's cool because it's all different kinds of fingers in different states of decay. Like I think there's like a blue lady's finger with a red nail on it. It's like, wow.
That might have been a nod to Beetlejuice.
Yeah, could have been.
Just saying.
But yeah, I started talking about earlier my television. I got a weird sense of almost vertigo watching the scene. It's the big climactic, the penultimate climactic scene where Durant is in a helicopter and Darkman gets dragged throughout Detroit, practically all of Michigan on this helicopter, hanging by a cable, just whipping around. And I realized, like, that's not a shitty dummy. It's an actual stunt person, like, doing this. And it's not a digital effect or anything like that. It's almost sickening. I'm sitting there thinking, like, because my stomach is up in my mouth, just thinking about what this person. I mean, I know it's their job, and they're probably like harnessed into this thing 9 ways to Sunday. But I mean, just I've been ziplining over the Smokies, right? Completely like strapped in and safe, and I still have the fear of God in me. So just watching this and realizing what Raimi was wanting to do for a giant set piece to get really impress the audience is like, yeah, this rivals in a lot of ways what Tim Burton was able to do in Batman, because that's a big fantasy world. This looks like something you could be watching on the news.
Well, and Raimi does it in the daytime.
Yeah, it's in the daytime, and let's not forget just how many practical effects and stunts you have going on in here. You've got those helicopters going down. I know it's only 1 or 2 streets, but you still got the shot of the 2 helicopters, the cop chasing Durant's helicopter with the guy dangling down the street, and they're not that far above ground. You know, the guy dangling is.
They pass over one another, I think, at some point. Like, I don't know if that was just the camera angle or if they were really doing like helicopter flybys. Plus the bit, and I haven't thrown up the spoiler banner for any of this, so sorry, folks. But the big moment where they're going through the tunnel, and I swear they ripped this off in Mission Impossible, 6 years later or whatever it is. He just hooks the thing and the helicopter flies into the tunnel and it doesn't make it explodes. It looks so good. I mean, then you've got like the green screen, whatever, of, Darkman kind of like going through the tunnel, like looking back and everything. It looks terrible, but that helicopter shot was boss.
But generally the shots that look kind of bad are the comedic shots. Right. They look like maybe they were inserted afterwards. Like he said, use a laugh here, like Liam Neeson grumbling as he's like being sort of hitting the sides of these skyscrapers and stuff, and they cut him going, motherfucker, like he's Dick Dastardly or something. They seem like fill-ins almost, but you're right. A lot of the storyboarding of the stunt work is pretty damn incredible, and it's done during the daytime, and the practical effects, bravo.
Yeah, and let's not forget that composite scene where he is on top of the truck. That's an actual truck, and that's the actual helicopter wreckage they have behind him. I mean, so it's not, even though he might be in front of the screen, they actually shot that with some flaming stuff behind it. So it's like,
we were talking about, I can't remember what we were talking about, but something earlier in the conversation inspired me to think, what if they were to do Darkman today? Now, I'm not talking about remaking it because I feel like, what's the hook? But if they were to do like a requel, you could still, because Darkman's still running around at the end of this movie, you could bring back Liam Neeson to pass the torch. And by torch, I mean probably his own flaming hand, because he can't feel anything because his nerves are shot, to a new scientist or something. I mean, this movie is kind of like Swamp Thing in a way, with the big lab explosions, like an urban Swamp Thing. But that would be really interesting to see. And one of the other points, and I know I'm kind of like all over the place, but I keep coming with these thoughts and then I get lost during the course of our hour of talking. So I want to get them all out. What I loved about the end of this movie, besides, you wonder, okay, you're going to see one last Darkman disguise. Who's it's going to be? Oh shit, that's right. It's Sam Raimi. It's got to be Bruce Campbell. Babyface Bruce Campbell looking back through the crowd at Frances McDormand. Very much like a Usual Suspects kind of thing, where you've got Chaz Palminteri going out onto the street and looking, where'd he go?
Yes, missed him.
Yeah. But what I loved is that at the end of this movie, Darkman, or Peyton Westlake, decides that he can't ultimately be with the woman that he loves because his mind is too far gone. He's done too much. His condition isn't getting any better. Not only his like skin condition, but his mental state. So he makes the decision to run off, and you get the feeling he's always going to be around and be her protector, but it's too dangerous for her to be around him. Fast forward to Spider-Man 2 in 2004, and at the end of,
Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man.
The original Spider-Man, right? Because 04 was when they got married, right?
Mary Jane. Yeah, he can't be there to. Yeah, exact same ending.
He walks away from her, but it's because the danger is external rather than internal. So yeah, it's all these great ideas are caught up in this melange of a non-brand comic book movie, sort of comic book movie, that you would see play out in other genre films for the next 20 plus years. This is the unsung hero of the comic book film.
Well, 90s in general, up until I would say Blade, between Batman and Blade, that 10-year span, Hollywood was trying to figure this genre out, and you had the good with the bad coming out. And I dare say movies like Darkman helped lay the groundwork, at least plant seeds of ideas going, okay, this worked, this didn't, we can work this part in, so that when Raimi comes back and ends up getting Spider-Man, he used the good stuff that he learned from Darkman and started to apply it, refined it after 10 years or so into Spider-Man.
I also think it was a great example of the story of Schumacher, and I don't want to keep dumping on him, but I think in the 80s, to some degree in the 90s, and now I think most of the directors are kind of on board with how they have to do these things. And that is, they have to be as well done as you can. You can't, because people will notice if there's shitty effects and stuff like that. Thankfully, the studios are backing most of these things with money, and certainly that's true. But I think the Marvel examples are kind of almost the ultimate sort of reflection of all this, where it has to be well done. You have to put a lot of character under it. You have to have surprises, but maybe most importantly, you have to have directors who take the material seriously. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be always serious, but you're laughing with it versus at it. And I think Joel Schumacher always laughed at it. That's why every line from Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze is a god-awful Akiva Goldsman pun. It's like, you just know he sat down there and said, Akiva, just go to the idiom dictionary and come up with every frozen kind of ice cold Coors Light line you can conjure. And he did. And it's like every goddamn line. And that's laughing at the genre, not laughing with it, where, like with what was done in Die Hard or the Spider-Man movie. There's funny, there's cheekiness to it. Some of like Willem Dafoe when he comes over and Tobey Maguire is on the ceiling and he's bleeding and he just misses it and stuff like that. That's funny, but we're laughing with it. It's joyful, it's fun, as opposed to I'm condescending to this genre. And that's what I love, at least about where most of this stuff has come since then. And whether it's action, adventure, horror, in some ways comic books, I think these guys, the Burtons, the Raimis, who was the director of Die Hard? I forget his name right now.
Oh, John McTiernan.
John McTiernan. Yeah, the McTiernans took this stuff seriously, and maybe going back to Richard Donner, who, there's some silliness maybe in the Ned Beatty character in Superman, but the destruction of Planet Krypton is pretty dark, and Donner gave it a sense of like, let's have fun with this, but let's never make it. Christopher Reeve is never ridiculed in that movie, even though he's in blue underwear. Blue long johns. I mean, he's, there's humor of it, but I mean, that's why I still think it's the most amazing superhero performance, because you totally get into him and like him, and you never go, oh, he looks ridiculous in that outfit. He doesn't, not the way the movie treats it.
Well, even, Lex Luthor. I mean, Gene Hackman is one of the great comic book movie villains. Okay, in Superman 1 and 2, we'll overlook the others. But I mean, you look at him, he's kind of ridiculous looking and everything with that 70s fashion and those weird wigs. But, there's no doubt that you're dealing with an evil genius when you're talking to him, because he can get like stone cold. And even when he's making jokes or insults, it's so cutting.
Yes, that's a great point. Because and think of it, how cutting he is. That's a great, because he's cutting serious. Like when he goes, so this sick, twisted maniac is going to, and he puts the thing around his neck, and I mean, he's just chilling there. But then he also has the same sort of cutting thing, like, and Otis, next time, give me the robe when I'm out of the pool. It's just he's just turning the cutting and then twisting the knife there too, albeit a little bit more wittily.
And the best, I think the best Lex Luthor delivery, he didn't say anything.
Oh, the watch.
Tessmacher says, but Lex, my mother lives in Hackensack. He just looks at his watch and looks at her, says,
no,
and then walks away.
No, he doesn't.
Oh my God. All right. Well, I think any kind of closing thoughts on Darkman, because we've talked about it and a lot of other things, but I want to wrap it up.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, the last thing I'll say is some of these movies, and again, I don't want to keep coming back to the RoboCops and Total Recall and stuff like that, but you could argue that maybe they're a little hammy or dated, or, some of it may seem even a little bit over the top, but I give those movies credit. They play well. Here it is. And it's not just nostalgia for when I first saw them when I was a younger lad, but there was such energy and commitment and verve to them, like even Starship Troopers. I mean, something like that. There's a lot of detail in that movie. They really thought a lot of things through, and maybe it's not the best acted and wholly conceived, but Paul Verhoeven there did a terrific job. And I love that when you see these people who are really invested in, okay, if I'm going to do this, let's do it. Let's have fun with it. Let's do it well and give it some real guts. And I mean, I just think these kind of movies tend to be eminently watchable. Total Recall, there's so much to notice in that movie and so much cleverness and the way the future is seen. And here, Darkman, I mean, yeah, you're right. The stunt Darkman is running away from explosions that are happening 10 feet behind him. That's played for real. It's not, CGI will just put all this shit in there. Like, David Fincher now does no more squibs. We're just putting all the blood splatter in post effects. Smart, doesn't have to do as many takes, but this shit was real back then. And it's done so well. And I just applaud that you watch these and you see an energy and it transmits to the audience.
To play off that, my final thought is, in all honesty, it's the same parallel, I will say it, and stick with me here, folks, with wrestling. Okay. These movies in the late 80s and early 90s, and these ones that many of us adore, and not just because of nostalgia, it's for all the reasons Jeff says, there's detail in that, is because they're done unironic and they're done as if the veil is in front of your eyes, even though the veil. One of the things with wrestling, everybody says, oh, wrestling's fake. People who watched wrestling never thought that stuff was actually real, but you didn't say it. You went in for the experience and you enjoyed it. Similar with the films of this time period, the action films and the comic book films, and even some of the B films, they were making an actual movie. They regardless of the material, they were trying to make it as best they could with their budget, an actual movie. That's what like Darkman is an actual comic book movie. It's doing its best with what it was given, versus what I will say today, and it's not a blanket, there's always exceptions, but I will say you see it a lot more with genre films, especially. It almost feels like the approach, especially from studios, are like, well, they know this is just a comic book film. We don't necessarily need to do all this world build. They're just here for the heroes. We're just going to do this bit here and everything else around. We're not going to have to do too world building. We'll leave the sets kind of, generic or bland or whatever. Or you get like what Jeff said with Starship Troopers, the amount of detail and world building they put in Starship Troopers for the type of film it is. Some of the CGI in there is still some of the best CGI I will say today. You know how many it was my first DVD I bought, Starship Troopers, and on our big screen, you know how many times I paused when one of the ships split and you get to see the decks in the ship glowing because it was cut in half. It's like, that looked great, but that's because
that's not the scene I was expecting you to describe. Well,
there was also some other.
Well, those arachnid attacks are terrifying.
Not that one either.
No, he's talking about the shower scene. But anyway, the go-ahead shower scene.
That's very effective too.
It is, but for different reasons. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there was a more genuine
in my heart still.
A genuality to it, just like Darkman has. Darkman has a genuinality to it, to where, yes, it's campy, it's schlocky. They know they have a limited budget, but they're making an actual film. They're not making a campy, schlocky film because, people like campy, schlocky films, so they're making it a real film with what they've got. And that's just Raimi's style, versus today where people intentionally try to make bad films. And I'm going to tell you right now, folks, if you intentionally try to make a bad film, it's just going to be a bad film. It's not going to be a so bad it's good film. It's just going to be bad, because what makes a so bad it's good film is the fact that no one involved was trying to make a bad film. They were trying to make a film. They had a vision, and that's what Darkman is. You may look at it and go, oh, it's dated or whatnot, but look at the elements and what they're doing, and look at your comic book movies after this, just like Batman, and you will see so many influences and seeds that were tried out here first and then refined years later.
Right, and that's not to say that it was poorly done. It's just everything can be improved on, and that's why I started out calling this a time capsule movie. It's it does have its charms, but also it's got enough here that, like, when I was watching it, I was thinking, yeah, this could be something that they could remake today, or even though it's been parts of it have been done for the last 20 years, I think, and I'd say bring Sam Raimi back to do it. I would forgive him. That's too strong a word. I would not quite forgive him for Multiverse of Madness, but I would at least say, just put your mind back to 1980s Sam Raimi and let's make some magic happen. Anyhow, we got a couple more comments to close out the show. So Dead Man's Party, it was off the soundtrack to the Rodney Dangerfield movie Back to School. Yes, with an Oingo Boingo performance. Love it.
I've got that soundtrack.
Robert Downey Jr. was in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Academy Award winner Robert Downey Jr.
Keith Gordon's best friend.
Yes, his friend who looked like the poster child for birth control. Spielberg was close. Yep. Yeah. All right. And then other great composers you might want to look into: Mark Mancina and Alan Silvestri.
Oh, I got plenty of theirs too.
Yeah,
I've got plenty of theirs too.
I don't know the name. I know Alan Silvestri, of course, but who's Mark Mancina?
Gosh, I'm forgetting on that too, but I know Alan Silvestri well too. Let's look him up here. Help us out here. Miguel, come on.
I got some of his vinyl in my crates in the back. I'm trying to pull names because it's been a while since I listened. But
that'll be your homework for next time. Speaking of which, I don't know what next time is. It might actually be possibly Ghostbusters Afterlife at this point. I don't think we're going to do a show next week, a live stream on Wednesdays. So, but we'll be back probably the week after talking about not Ghostbusters Afterlife, Hidden Empire. I always get those two confused. Yeah. So anybody, anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say, except that it's time to get off this stream because I've had way too much coffee, not enough sleep, and too crazy of a day. But I've enjoyed winding down today with you, my esteemed colleagues / friends. Let me bring your names up again. Jeff York of The Establishing Shot, Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions, and The Spoiler Room, both of which you guys should out there check out the show that we did the other night on Mark's channel with Mr. Joe Randazzo talking about 1931's M.
It just went live today. So
sweet. Okay, I'll try to remember to do this. I'll drop a link to it down below so people can check that out. A great conversation contrasting the 31M to the 51M, which we had done the week before. Wow. But anyway, thanks everyone for hanging out. Again, if you like what we had to say here, please like. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to Kicking the Seat, and also check out other Earth's Mightiest Critics, including Mark and Jeff, our entire talented roster below. Ring the bell for notifications, all that good stuff. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much for talking Darkman 1990. Oh, also still shameless plug number 98.
I gotta get that
4K Blu-ray on from Scream Factory, our dear friends at Scream Factory. Looks great all these years later. Although the ultra high definition, it's not that flattering to some of the effects shots we've talked about before. Film grain and VHS degradation really help some of these classics out. But that's all for now. I'm going to say, before I let everyone go, I promise, I keep forgetting. I remember the trailer for this movie sold me a film that I didn't quite see because I thought it was going to be like grim and gritty and totally like dark and serious. But I love the voice, the narration, the voiceover. It's on the poster. They destroyed everything he had, everything he was. Now crime has a new enemy, and justice has a new face. Love it. That is one of the great movie taglines of all time.
I miss movie poster taglines. I really miss movie.
I miss movie posters. They are a lost art form.
Especially this one. You'll
like even Dune afterwards.
The Dune
movie posters.
So beautiful.
They're the teaser posters are great, but then they just do the montage, the Photoshop of all the big cast members. Dune deserved something more evocative, I think.
Something more painterly. I mean,
yes.
You could almost do like the Empire Strikes Back with Chani and oh my gosh, Paul, except for Han and Leia. Yeah.
There's some people on Twitter who are artists who do, or Instagram, who do their own posters for all kinds of things. I mean, everything from the modern stuff to city lights to Mulholland Drive, and they're really clever. And the studio's just it's a lost art. I think it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Well, why hire an artist when you've got, someone in the graphics department who can whip something up in, a day? But anyhow, not to degrade graphics artist departments or whatever. Anyway, I'm letting everybody go. Take care. Good night. And we'll catch you next time. Again, don't know when that's going to be, but we'll